Hello and welcome back to Perspectives. On today's show, we have our usual roundup of the main stories affecting the Sikh community around the world. And as another important anniversary passes just a few days ago, we join the community in paying tribute to two courageous Sikhs, known as Sukha and Jinder, who gave their lives avenging the atrocities of 1984. And talking of tribute, we also pay tribute to the Sikh community itself, who've rallied around so magnificently to help and support that poor victim of the terrible rape here in the UK as she makes her first public statement. But all this and more on today's show. But joining me, as always, is our very own correspondent in Canada, James Cousineau. Good morning, James.
Good morning, Angus, and good morning to our viewers out there. Thanks for tuning in yet again. We are excited to see so many people actively involved in our chat rooms. But don't forget that you can help us to push our viewers up by just simply sharing and liking. And of course, commenting on the content you see, and your comments could make it onto the show at the end. So stick around for all of our comments by our viewers like you. Back to you, Angus.
Indeed, and James and I together will be bringing you our perspectives on the daily news affecting the Sikh community across the world. And indeed, as James said, we will take a look at loads of great comments at the end of the show, which have been pouring in. So thank you, as always, for that. Right, James, let's get underway. What are you going to start us off with this morning?
As I like to wear a bit of cologne, I'm much partial to the scents that come out by Ralph Lauren in terms of polo, and I'm glad because here we are looking at a story, Angus, of a perfume called Opium, and it is just ridiculous in how this has come about. It is the story of an Indian national who lives in the United States. He has an American wife, and he was doing food deliveries. He got stopped because he had a little plastic sheet over his license plate, which, from my understanding, they are used to block the intersection cameras or red light cameras or whatever. Now, regardless as to this, as he was stopped, the police decided that they needed to do a search of his vehicle. And in the vehicle, they found, on the screen here, you can see a little bottle of perfume by Yves Saint Laurent. And it is called Black Opium. Now, I don't know what label it had, but it was the perfume Opium. And he had this in his center console. Now, where it got ridiculous was that this officer thought that it was actual opium, not a perfume, and he arrested the guy. He thought that some idiot would actually drive around with a bottle in his console that said opium on it, advertising that they're carrying a narcotic. Just completely asinine. Now, it got even worse. Now, this gentleman, by the name of Kapil Raga, he was held in custody in the jail. And not only was he held in the jail, he was then held, they sent the bottle all the way to the lab to get it tested. Now, this takes time. Meanwhile, he is, he's being detained in a jail because of a bottle of perfume. And it finally comes back confirming that it was just perfume. It was not a drug dealer that's got an expensive bottle line of opiums. Now, you would think that it would end there, and he was released by a judge that day that the tests finally came back, proving that it was perfume. But instead, this is just the beginning. Now, this triggered an alert to the Homeland Security, or to ICE. They put a hold on him, and they came and took him into custody because of the fact that his lawyer made an error in filing some of the paperwork years ago. And they were actually in the process. They had found out about this error and were taking all legal steps to rectify the error that was made by an attorney. Not by them personally, but by an attorney. Now, this was not good enough. They transferred him around to several different ICE facilities. And he was there for about 30 days. They did not look at the common sense approach that he was arrested based on a ridiculous charge of narcotics possession that was perfume, and the fact that they were taking every legal step to rectify the situation about his visa status. Now, they turned around and they released him finally. They did not drop the charges right away. In terms of his immigration status, they canceled his work permit. They canceled a bunch of other things, and now he's facing deportation out of the US because of this whole situation. ICE has not taken a look at it from a human standpoint, that a lawyer made a mistake, an officer that was, well, I won't even get into how ridiculous that was. But again, they are not taking any measures to protect this gentleman. Instead, they are looking to deport him. During this time, of course, since he's been released from detention, he's not allowed to work. He is, and this is the detention center that one of the prisons or jails and holding centers that he was in Saline County. And it is just ridiculous. Now he's facing deportation. If he gets a jaywalking ticket, so much as a jaywalking ticket, they can take him back into custody and hold him there. They have had to, or his wife has had to take up 3 jobs to be able to support them during this whole process, and all of the legal fees and everything else that accompany that. It is the most ridiculous thing ever. And where the common sense approach is in the US when it comes to the immigration just seems to have been thrown right out the window, Angus. It is ridiculous, this whole story, and how it has transpired, and how little humanity comes in, or even common sense. So again, if you're interested in more information, we'll have it on our Substack. You can also search for the name of the individual. It's in the story, and you can search that and be able to get information as well, because they do have a GoFundMe page to help them pay the legal fees and to get through this whole ordeal, because as I said, it is just ridiculous. And this Benton Police Department officer should, be held accountable as well for such a ridiculous arrest on such a ridiculous thing. All he had to do is, we're in a technology age. All he had to do is pull out his phone and pull up opium, Yves Saint Laurent. He would have had a million photos of what the bottles look like, and he could have smelled it to realize that, hey, this smells like cologne. He doesn't have to spray it up his nose to see if he gets high. He just has to smell the bottle. I just couldn't believe how ridiculous this little thing can blow into something international like this and be such a crazy event. And there's been different organizations and groups such as the Chinese who have battled with Yves Saint Laurent since the brand came out in around 1977. And they basically thought that it was insensitive because of the opium history in China, and the fact that they thought that people could be encouraged to actually use illicit drugs and everything else. But that's a whole story in itself that we won't get into today. Now, shifting gears here to British Columbia for those who are foreign workers or just anybody else that works within the construction industry. We're going to focus primarily on the angle here of the foreign workers, or to new Canadians, in terms of this new law that's coming in. And it's called the Construction Prompt Payment Act. Essentially, what's happening is that a lot of people in the industry are treated as self-employed, as contractors or subcontractors, or they're employed by the contractors and subcontractors. At the end of the day, it could take potentially, 60, 90 days for these people to get paid for their work on these construction sites after, processing invoices, all of that. The government has said that this is not acceptable. And what else was happening is that people were not getting paid at all. And because it really had an impact on the temporary farm workers, on people who didn't understand the rights, but also people who are working trade jobs. So they are working for a paycheck to pay the bills. They didn't have money if they failed to be paid. They didn't have the money or understand the legal system to go forward and file a complaint against the employers or the contracting companies to get that pay. Now, there were also different concerns about miscategorization, and that was for the temporary workers or new workers to be classified in one regard as an employee but not have any of the coverages and acting as a self-employed individual. This left them without certain protections, and this loophole has been changed. And now they are taking away the incumbent process of having to go through the legal system and the expense of trying to hire lawyers or deal with it that way. they're actually going to be bringing in a whole new model that will adjudicate out of court these claims. They also have put in a timeline that once an invoice is submitted, what they call a real or true invoice, that is submitted, the company has 30 days to pay that. And then when the contractor receives it, they have 7 days in which to pay employees. So no more of this delays, no more of this, this miscategorization. Or what's even bigger is that some of the contractors and some of the builders have been using this, saying that they can withhold pay or a portion of it if they don't do certain things that may have been against the Health and Safety Act. People not understanding their rights or concerned that the paycheck could be withheld. This eliminates that completely because regardless as to reason, if they are not paid, then this new system comes in. Not only can they be adjudicated within 30 days is what the target is, they have to be, or they will be fined and penalties put in place. It also protects the workers if they haven't been paid as per the dates involved and have outstanding invoices. They can walk off the job without penalty. And this is key because if they are taking it on a piecework or a contract amount as opposed to per hour, then they can walk off that job. They are not responsible for any delay costs. They are not responsible and cannot be held liable for any delays for other trades that may be impacted by them walking off the job. This gives them that power. And they just have to make sure that they have kept proper records of dates that they've worked, the dates that they should have been paid, and the fact that they have not been paid. It really takes that power away from the employers to exploit workers, put them in unsafe situations, or just to not pay them at all. Because again, when you are making a small amount of wages, you can't afford the old process to hire lawyers and go after the employers. So now this gives you the protections, the information, and there are going to be advocacy groups that are trained in how to use the system that work on behalf of minorities and temporary foreign workers. So again, it's going to have some real teeth and ensure that the exploitation is cut down against foreign workers. So again, it is a huge, huge step for British Columbia, a huge step for the workers' rights, and regardless as to how they are classified, if they are brought in and the employer tries to explain that they don't have any rights because they may be, under the table cash employees, whatever, that does not matter now. They are going to be offering this protection to anybody who provides the service or material. So therefore, even if they're paid cash under the table or off the books as it is, they are still protected, which I think is also a major, major boost because even if they're working under the table, it could be a side job to help pay the rent or put food on the table or whatever. They've done the work. They should be paid, and they should be paid in full within a timely manner. And that's what this is all about. And again, you can see a much more in-depth report on our Substack on this. And take a look. I think that it's important for everybody to know this new information. Especially with all of the viewers we have in British Columbia. It's great to get the information out to others, and especially people who may not have English as a first language to be able to go over it with them or at least translate. Now, as we move on, let's take a look. Yes, we are almost here in terms of the end of 2025. We're in the final quarter of the year, and yet there is still arbitrary detention of Sikh descent in India, whether that is relating to the farmers' protests or whether it is the Khalistan movement. It is a big problem, and more human rights organizations are bringing it to the forefront. They are demanding that there are accountabilities and changes made at all different levels, as well as making recommendations to what those changes should be. Now, we've explored a lot about Jaggi being arbitrarily detained in India, but also we've talked a lot about Indian nationals being detained because of their involvement, whether it was the farmer protests, whether it was the Khalistan movement, whether it was in Kashmir. and different regions. So again, it shows that this is still a problem and that in 2025, we have not seen a lot of movement. And as far as that goes, under certain administrations globally, we have seen it go backwards instead of forwards when it comes to human rights and the what they refer to as the Unlawful Activities Prevention Act, and how that is arbitrarily being used to lock people up, even more so as they push forward with the Khalistan referendum in different locations around the world. Now, there's different laws that have been in place for many, many years, even going back to the colonialization of the British there in India. And a lot of the law that was left over from that was actually brought in by the British to go after the insurgents or freedom fighters, as they were called. And those laws, when the partition happened in 1947, stayed on the Indian legal books and were transferred over. Now, in about, I believe it was, so I'm going to get the year right, so I won't even guess at it. Now, the law was overturned by the courts in India. However, that's when they brought in with the BJP the new Unlawful Activities Prevention Act and the strict levels there with sedition and treason and all of that. So what they have found, though, is going back to 2014 when the BJP government came into power, there is almost a doubling of people that have been arrested, and 95% of those in the year 2014 alone were because they spoke out or insulted in a public manner and politicians. So it wasn't because of them doing anything illegal except for speaking out. And that led to 85% of the people arrested were exactly for that. And that was just speaking up and saying things. Now, as you look at it, you can look at it also in the case of journalists who have been arrested and detained because they're public reporting or international reporting and even local reporting. It's not even that they've gone to an international level. But again, they are using that act in order to silence any dissent. Now, let's take a look at it in terms of the specific Khalistan question, and it is preemptive punishment. Now, we've talked about this at great lengths, and I thought that for any of our non-Sikh viewers that we would revisit this in much greater detail because of the fact that it is such an important atrocity and human rights violation that it needs to be looked at. Now, of course, as we said, they are using it against people who have dissent for the government. And that includes people on foreign soil in Western nations, the likes of Gurpatwant Singh Pannoon of Sikhs for Justice, Hardeep Singh Nijjar, who, of course, was assassinated here in Canada in June of 2023, and Parmanjit Singh Pama. So again, a lot of different people, though, and these are international. So imagine the numbers of people who are in prisons or jails in India that don't have their names out there, that we don't know about. And the estimates are at about 10,000 people a year that are brought in under the guise of these acts. Now, the other thing to look at is just a reminder that they do not have the right to trials. They can be kept under the Unlawful Activities Prevention Act indefinitely without ever seeing a judge or without any type of recourse. And that is a big problem. And again, human rights organizations are screaming about this worldwide, but the governments are not listening. Instead, they use their ways, and I'm talking the India government specifically in this regard. They use their bots and all of their social media and false news reports to bury this information and to turn it on its head. So they're looking to frame these individuals as bad actors when all they've done is spoken out. Now, here's a couple of quick testimonies here that I'll wrap up the story with because we are running out of time as usual. But the case of Nodeep Kaur, she was a 24-year-old Dalit, and she was a labor rights activist. She was arrested for her involvement in the farmers' protest and they brought allegations of extreme custodial violence against her in the forefront of the news cycle. It actually made it out. Now, in her bail plea, she claimed that she was severely beaten by the Haryana police officers after her arrest on January the 12th in 2021. Her sister and her lawyer went further. They alleged that a medical examination revealed injuries consistent with a physical or a sexual assault. Now, these allegations prompted a National Human Rights Commission to take what they call suo motu, and that essentially means that the court can take action against the accused without the consent or a formal complaint by the accuser or the victim. So the courts can move on with taking those claims further. Now, again, the report from the Haryana police on the claims of the illegal confinement and the torture were played out in the courts, and I wasn't able to find the final results of that, but we will definitely try to find that in the future for you. And then there's also the testimony of Gurmeet Singh, who was an 80-year-old veteran, and he was deeply humiliated as he was among protesters arrested. However, Singh was arrested from his tent at a protest site days after the January 26th rally, an event he did not participate in due to his age. He recounted being pushed, beaten with sticks and other items, and then dragged away from the police. Now, he didn't suffer as much physical injury as he did psychological. He was a decorated soldier who fought in 3 wars for India and received 10 medals. And now they were labeling him as a terrorist just because he was at a site of a former protest. And he personally stated that he cannot swallow the humiliation. So again, it shows the definitive issue or the definitive damages, both emotionally and physically, to those who are being subjected to these issues that are going on in India. Now, if you want to take a look on the Substack again, I try to give you fair and equal reporting, but also very in-depth. So again, you can look at what Human Rights Watch is saying, as well as Amnesty International, and others, as well as the U.S. Department of State, and how that is kind of fallen on deaf ears with the current international trade negotiations and other issues that the U.S. and India are embroiled in terms of, disagreements right now, Angus. And tomorrow night, I'll save the final story for tomorrow night, and that was looking at how corporations and prisons are monetizing the communication systems, not only in the prisons and the jails, but in the ICE detention centers, and how that is having a major impact on those who have been detained by ICE, how it is preventing them from getting proper documentation access to get their evidence for court, to contact lawyers, family members, and all of that. We'll take a look at that in depth tomorrow night, Angus.
Yes, indeed, and thanks for that, James. There's, clearly the big story there is of course this ongoing weaponising of the law by India, and we've talked at great length in many shows about it, and the evidence is everywhere. We have Amritpal Singh as one of the high-profile victims of this. Jagtar Singh Johal, another high-profile victim of this weaponising of the law, and it's just a classic example of an authoritarian regime. This is what authoritarian regimes do. They create this sort of mirage of we are a democratic society that follows the rule of law. Do you know, in Russia and China they have elections, but you certainly wouldn't call Russia and China democracies by any means. But on the face of it, they have elections. The fact that the leaders get in with 99% of the vote. Oh, North Korea, I think, technically has elections as well. I mean, God forbid that you vote against the dear leader in North Korea. But that essentially is where India is. That's where it's heading. It is we are a democratic nation on the face of it, but God forbid you go up against the ruling Brahmins and look what happens. If you dare stand up and actually try to hold us to account, and that figure of 85% of detainees under these dreadful pieces of legislation essentially are political arrests. They are political prisoners, and again, if any nation has political prisoners, even one political prisoner, that nation cannot claim itself as a democracy. So if 85% of these detainees are effectively political dissenters, that speaks volumes. Now, this is terrible, and this, of course, it's horrific when we look at how these pieces of legislation that are being used as a weapon against any political dissent. But there is a bright side, weirdly, to all this, because the worse it gets, the better it gets for Khalistan, for the whole legal case of Khalistan, because the ultimate arbiter of all this is going to be the international court. The international courts, the United Nations. It is going to be these objective global bodies like the UN and the international courts. They're the ones who are going to look at the situation. So when the Sikh community go to these bodies and say, look what's happening in India, look at what's happening to us particularly, we demand the right to secessionism, we demand the right to our own sovereignty. And then the global community will then look objectively at all the evidence laid out, and they will look at these pieces of legislation. They will look at statistics like 85% were political detainees that say, yeah, something clearly is not right in the land of India. And clearly these people, these Sikhs, clearly have a legal defence against India's own legal argument that it's a threat to their geographical integrity, the integrity of their borders. Yeah, Khalistan will be that. But as I said in yesterday's show, the key legal argument that completely blows India's legal argument out of the water against it is that if the Sikh community are treated differently. And here you go, right, once again. So there's an old phrase, it's always darkest before the dawn. So what I would say to the audience, really, and particularly those supporters of Khalistan, as things get worse and worse and worse, and the BJP government, and therefore Hindutva, get increasingly desperate as the momentum is building for Khalistan, it is going to look worse because they are going to weaponize the law. They're going to use every possible thing in their arsenal to try and clamp down on this enormously growing movement for Khalistan. Amritpal Singh, a prime example. They are going to get worse and worse and worse, and things are going to look dire, things are going to look darker. But that is what happens before the dawn. That dawn, of course, is Khalistan. So it's very clear to me. Don't panic. All we need to do is keep highlighting the fact of what India is up to. There is always a reckoning. In history has proven there is always a reckoning. As I always say, the people always win in the end. It might not happen tomorrow, it might not happen next week, but the people always win in the end. There is always justice in the end. There is always a reckoning. So India is really on a stand of warning now, is that, you can weaponize this so-called law. You can persecute the Sikh community as much as you like, but one day there will be a reckoning and one day there will be Khalistan. So as I say, I think the more we report this, the more powerful the legal argument in the global community, how stronger that legal argument becomes to establish Khalistan. Now, I just want to do a quick comment on the opium story. I started chuckling on this one because my first ever girlfriend back in the 1980s wore opium, and I thought, this is really, really big and clever and funny and everything. But yeah, what a story! I mean, it's a horrific story, and we shouldn't laugh because this poor guy is having his life ruined by this ridiculous situation of this perfume. And I wonder if Yves Saint Laurent itself has actually heard of this story, because I wonder if Yves Saint Laurent could actually piggyback on this for a bit of publicity on this, because again, it's just such a ridiculous story. But there is a serious side to this. Of course, this is how it escalated, and again, it comes back to discussions we had a while ago about the whole ICE thing. Is that unfortunately ridiculous stories like this have come about because essentially it's down to exploitation. The immigration system has been exploited by a small number of people. It's been abused, and it's made it worse for, unfortunately, people like this gentleman, like the poor grandmother recently who was threatened with deportation, etc. These are innocent victims who've just fallen, who in previous years would have just been left. If there were mistakes, it was okay. We'll let you go. You're a good citizen. We'll let you get on with things. But because the system has been exploited, it's been abused to such an extent, illegal immigration has become the issue of the 21st century. It means now that the backlash from most of the community, and Trump was elected essentially on this, and here in the UK it's likely we will have a reform government next with the same agenda, is that they're being elected with these enormous mandates to clamp down on illegal immigration, and they will do it excuse me, black and white. And you see the picture of that detention facility, it's frightening. But then I thought, well, look, you've got to look at this in black and white. Illegal immigrants are, by definition, illegal. There has got to be a deterrent. We can't look after these people and treat them in cotton wool, as these people are breaking the law. They are lawbreakers. It's black and white, which is fine on the face of it as a technical legal argument. Sadly, because the system has been exploited, that middle grey area, the area where normally you would take a common sense approach with this guy and the grandmother. That has to be thrown out because, again, of these wretched minority people who have exploited the system. They've poured people who themselves are victims of this, ironically, is that a lot of these illegal immigrants have been taken and exploited themselves. They paid tens, if not sometimes hundreds of thousands of dollars to be illegally taken into the United States. So there are no winners here. Everybody is losing except these wretched small minority of people traffickers. They're the only people who've been winning so far. Unfortunately, the only way to treat them now is this black and white brutal backlash against them, James. So, as I say, no winners in this.
Absolutely. And let's not forget that he had entered the country properly. He had done everything legally. And then with one application that was just mishandled by a lawyer, the cards come crashing down years and years later when they actually noticed it and tried to fix it. So it's a sad state. It really is. But yeah, shooting back to the other part is that we spoke last week about about Russia and others supporting the involvement or the inclusion of India for a permanent seat at the UN. These are the types of situations, and I'm referring back to the other story about the detentions and arbitrary detentions and human rights abuses. These are the types of things that really people need to stay on top of and to get out there in the public realm, not just in the Sikh community or the Hindu community or anywhere else. In all communities, in all segments, it's got to be first and foremost, so that the regular people that are supporting the UN decisions can say, no, that's not right. Whether you're Sikh, whether you're Hindu, whether you're Chinese, Buddhist, doesn't matter. Everybody should be speaking up to ensure that if India wants in the UN for a permanent seat, that they start giving the rights that the UN and the Human Rights Council guarantee to all citizens around the world. So again, that I think is a very important message. And for our viewers, of course, the majority of our viewers are of Sikh background and so forth. So we encourage you to also share our stories on your platform so that it can reach out to a broader mass audience, so that we can make sure that these things are well known throughout the diaspora, but also outside of the diaspora communities as well.
Indeed, and it does make your skin crawl a bit when you see our own leaders shaking hands with Narendra Modi, when you know that behind the scenes things like this are going on, that these political detentions are just an everyday occurrence in India. All India's doing is damaging its own reputation. So again, it's beholden on people like us and channels like us to keep highlighting the truth. That's what we're here for, and that's what we must continue to do. And indeed, our audience have the same responsibility to do the same. So, right, let me move on. And there's one comment that's always stuck in my mind that we received some time ago, is that Sikhs never forget. The Sikh community doesn't never forget, and it should never forget the history, because of course the history of the Sikh people it's rich in wonderful stories. It's rich in a great history and military history, etc. But it's also rich in tragedy and betrayal and lessons that have had to be learnt the hard way. And one thing that's very noticeable, I sort of see with the Sikh community, is the fact that they're always very respectful and always pay tribute to the Shaheeds, the martyrs. And of course, sadly, tragically, there have been a long list, a long line of martyrs through centuries, actually, as it turns out, but certainly, sadly, at the end of the 20th century particularly. Those terrible times of 1984 and then the years that followed in 1984. And there was another Shaheed anniversary that passed just a few days ago, October the 9th. Because back in 1992, two Shaheeds known as Sukha and Jinda gave their lives for the cause. And I just want to recite the story of why they became Shaheeds, because again, it's very symbolic of what the Sikh community stand for, and of course the terrible tragedies that have been perpetrated against the community over the years, and of course it does link to 1984. So. Gurdwaras across, certainly here in the UK, and I know across the diaspora, have been recognising the anniversary of these two Shaheeds, and this is I'll play this in the background while I recount the story. This actually is here in the UK. There was again a long tribute paid to these two Shaheeds. Shaheed Bhai Sukhdev Singh, known as Sukha, and Bhai Harjinder Singh, known as Jinda. They were two Shaheeds who gave their lives back in 1992. Now, Sukhdev Singh, Bhai Sukhdev Singh, to start with, he was the son of a pair of farmers. They were Amritdhari Sikhs born in Rajasthan over in India. And he was, at the time in 1984, in the terrible attacks against Darbar Sahib in 1984, he was at the time studying for a master's degree actually in English when that attack happened. So when he, like many Sikhs at that time, witnessed this attack and was absolutely horrified, was appalled and horrified, and felt motivated to take revenge because, again, the symbolism of that attack, not just the sheer scale of the murder of innocent men, women and children in the Darbar Sahib. It was a symbolic attack against the centre of the Sikh faith. So, of course, Sikhs all around the world were absolutely horrified to the core about what they witnessed on that day. So, likewise, Sukhdev Singh was equally horrified and decided he had to take revenge. Sikhs never forget, you see. So he joined with one of his friends, a guy called Bhai Bajinder Singh, and Bhai I've got to get these names right. There's a lot of names involved in here, but it's Bhai Bajinder Singh Raju and Bhai Harjinder Singh, who also then became known as Jinder, to seek their revenge for this atrocity. Now, so Harjinder and Sukhdev Singh made their way to Delhi and made Delhi their centre of operations. Of course, Delhi was where the pogroms, the terrible genocides that happened after the assassination of Gandhi at the end of October in 1984. So they based themselves in Delhi to plan their operations. So when they went to Delhi, the government had already identified these guys as potential problems, and actually they were known to be members of what was called the Khalistan Commando Force. Now, in 1984, as a response to a lot of the attacks on the Sikh community, all these little disparate groups got together. There's the KLF, the KCF, and all these other sort of militias started to form in absolute anger and decisions to say, look, we've got to stand up against this persecution by the Indian state. We've got to join up and defend ourselves. As I say, the whole battle really was a battle of self-defense more than anything else. So these two guys went to Delhi, and of course they were known by the Indian authorities, and their faces were sort of posted up. So of course they sort of went undercover, as they said. But they decided then that they needed to find a symbolic target as an act of vengeance for that attack on the Darbar Sahib. And they decided that General Arun S. Vaidya should be the target. The General Vaidya was the general who was in charge of that attack on the Golden Temple in June 1984. So, of course, he was the ultimate, the ideal target to send a symbolic message back to the Indian state. You attack us, we won't forget, we'll attack you back, we will take revenge. Sikhs never forget. So, now Vaidya himself, he was actually, when he retired from the army, and he did actually retire shortly after that event, he moved to Pune. And so as a result, the two Singhs reunited in Punjab. They left Delhi, moved back to the Punjab and travelled to Pune together themselves. Now, they arrived on August the 17th of 1986, as a couple of years afterwards. So they arrived on August the 17th, and they went to where they believed Vaidya's house was, only sadly to discover it actually moved. And there was still a servant there. And they had a bit of a problem trying to communicate with the servant because there were language problems. But the servant told them generally roughly where he was. So a couple of days later, they travelled to where they believed Vaidya's house was, and then recognised Vaidya's bodyguard outside the house. So they placed the house under surveillance. So a few days later, August the 19th, that morning around 11 a.m., they saw Vaidya's wife leave the house carrying an umbrella, followed by the general. Vaidya himself then went to the car and started driving the car with his wife beside him. And they went to the Sabji Mandi Bazaar. At that time, Harjinder Singh and Sukhdev Singh were on a motorcycle. And again, this sort of follows a very typical tactic, is that they both mounted a motorcycle together. They followed the car. And when they went shopping, they stayed nearby. And when Vaidya went shopping, returned to his car, Bhai Harjinder Singh pulled the motorcycle up beside the car, and on the back, Bhai Sukhdev Singh began to shoot, emptied his weapon into the car, and Vaidya was killed on the spot. And as a result, the two Singhs shouted Jai Karai and made their getaway. Now, I've tried to Google Jai Karai. This is what, again, I'll ask my audience, because my audience will explain to me what Jai Karai means. And I can't find its meaning. All I know is it is a battle cry. I guess it's like Boli Sonihal or something. But hopefully our audience can educate me and James what specifically Jai Karai means. I guess it's a Punjabi word. So please do let me know. Anyway, so they shouted Jai Karai, and as they fled the scene. Now, originally they had also wanted to kill another general who was involved in that attack, General Dayal, but he was out of reach at the time. So again, it was very much an opportunistic assassination. So after that assassination, Vaidya, they returned to the house that they'd rented. They changed clothes and fled by taking a bus to Bombay, as it was called at the time. And there they went to Durg and then fled ultimately to Calcutta, now Kolkata, by train. So next month, September the 17th, Bhai Sukhdev Singh returned to Pune to retrieve the weapons. And he went along with another Singh. Now, again, this is where fate played a hand. And unfortunately, in that trip, they got into a car accident with a truck, and at the scene, they were arrested. They were recognised and arrested. As a result, they were taken away, and here again, typical India, they were tortured for 5 months, and then for a year and a half following that, they were kept in leg irons. So again, no sort of gentle justice in 1980s India. So a year later, Bhai Harjinder Singh and Bhai Satnam Singh Bawar, one of his colleagues, was arrested in Delhi. So they were finally caught at the Gurdwara Majnu Dar Tilla. Now, Bhai Harjinder Singh was shot in the legs during the arrest, so he was unable to walk thereafter. And they tried to forcibly amputate his legs, but a Bengali doctor who was called in refused to allow this. So fortunately, the doctor stepped in to prevent this sort of medical atrocity. Clearly, the police were trying to inflict as much pain and damage on poor Harjinder as much as they could. So anyway, but as a result, Harjinder was tortured for another 4 months, and then eventually was taken to another jail in Pune. Now, his colleague Bhai Bawar was handed over to the Punjab police, who unsurprisingly murdered him. Another extrajudicial killing, just another one to add to the tens of thousands that happened during that time. In prison in Pune, Bhai Sukhdev Singh and the other Singhs who were alongside him had, on one evening, had finished their ardas, that's their prayers, and then after that they shouted Jai Karai, this sort of war cry. Interestingly, as they shouted that, in the cell just down the corridor, somebody recognised his voice. It was his old colleague, Bhai Harjinder Singh. Turned out they'd been put into the prison, into the same prison at the same time. And so, of course, they were reunited at last. And so together they were apparently heard to be shouting Jai Karai at the tops of their voices when they finally recognised that they were reunited in prison. So they stayed together from there on. And actually they became known as Sukha and Jinder, was sort of the name that they were sort of publicly known by. And during that time, Amnesty International and loads of human rights organisations around the world heard of their plight, heard of what was going on, because they were sentenced ultimately during that period to death. And of course, Amnesty International and again the human rights organisations around the world appealed for clemency and said, look, no, you should not be sentencing them to death. We don't believe in the death penalty. India at that time, as indeed it is today, was brutal. It brooked no mercy at all. And sadly, Bhai Harjinder Singh, Jinder, and Bhai Sukhdev Singh, Sukha, were executed in Pune on October the 9th, 1992. So that is the anniversary that we're recognising. But the key here is, again, two Shaheeds. They, as is so typical with the Sikh community, did not forget. They recognised this dreadful act, this dreadful atrocity that was perpetrated against their people in June 1984. And, of course, following in November, the genocide. Where the whole community, again, were targeted by mobs of rampaging Hindus, sadly. And they took revenge. And this is such a feature and a powerful feature of the Sikh community. And again, this always stands as a warning to any enemies of the Sikh people. The Sikh people always make better friends than enemies, because if you make an enemy of the Sikh people, they never forget. They will always get their revenge in the end. They will always find vengeance in the end. And this is what happened to these two Shaheeds. They got vengeance, and General Vaidya paid the ultimate price for his involvement in that atrocity. And I'm just going to wrap this up. There's a nice video actually that's been released as part of this, just that again just pays tribute to the Shaheeds. It sums up the story, and I want you to pay particular attention just to the final seconds of this video. It's very powerful.
ਹੁੰਦੀ ਏ ਸ਼ਾਨ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਦੀ ਜੱਗ ਵਿੱਚ ਸਭ ਤੋਂ ਉੱਚੀ
So apologies to the audience there. My again another technical issue. Let me just rewind a little bit of that so we can just check. We see the whole thing. So there you go. Again, very, very powerful message. They ultimately went to the gallows with smiles on their faces because they knew that they had gone a long way to restoring the honour and dignity of the Sikh people. In other words, you make an enemy of the Sikh people, you will pay the ultimate price, and we will go to the gallows smiling, knowing that we have achieved what we set out to do. So, I mean, what a great example there, James.
Absolutely. And I mean, the struggle that they went through, but they didn't lose their spirit. And I think that's very indicative of the Sikh culture and the people that, you know, you can put them down temporarily, but you can't take away their fighting spirit. And they will always come back. And as you said, Angus, they will always remember.
Indeed. So a very powerful story, and so we pay our own little small tribute to the two Shaheeds, and I say it brings goosebumps out, the bravery and the courage of some of these guys. And we mustn't forget, actually, it's very easy through the lens of modern day society in the 21st century saying, oh, it was a cold-blooded assassination. Now, you've got to understand the context is that the atrocities of 1984 were so horrific against the Sikh people that it is totally justified. The backlash and these assassinations were part of this. They were just a small act of essentially self-defense on behalf of the whole people. So again, people must never lose sight of the context of why General Vijay was killed in this way. So. Anyway, I'm now just going to move on because we're running out of time. Actually, as always, sadly, is that that dreadful rape that happened in here in the UK. Of the young Sikh girl, there's been a huge rallying round, and again we want to pay tribute to the Sikh community again, because again this is typical of the Sikh community and how it really essentially is just one large family who always rally around whenever any member of the community is hurt or attacked in any form of way. That they always rally around this huge effort, and the Gurdwara, particularly the local Gurdwara in Coventry here in the Midlands of the UK, has of course been the sort of the focal point of focusing the community, the local community's support, and they've in fact I'm just going to again just play another little video. This is the local
Vaheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Vaheguru Ji Ki Fateh. As you can see, the Gurukar and the Sangat and the local Sangat of Coventry have got together, got some gifts and just a few items for the people involved in the victims of the Albury case. We'll be meeting with her later today, and this is just, you know, it's just a minute gesture from the local Sangat just to let her know that we're standing with her in solidarity, and any support she needs, we're here for her. You know, really, you know, heartfelt thanks to all the local Sangat, all the Gurukars of Coventry as well, who have got together and kindly put some things together to give to Benji as a kind gesture from the Sangat of Coventry. Vaheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Vaheguru Ji Ki Fateh.
So, and the poor lady, the victim of this terrible attack, she's actually made a public statement now, and she says, "I'm deeply grateful to everyone who's thought of me during these challenging times and to those who've supported me from the very beginning. It's been difficult, but the continued support and kindness from members of the Sikh community mean more to me than words can express. Thank you from the bottom of my heart." So yeah, again, James, as I said, it's so typical of the community. I've never known a community actually so united and so dedicated to saviour, selfless service. It's always helping their fellow human being, and particularly when that fellow human being is within their own community. It's how they rally around. It's I mean, for example, the reward is now £30,000 to get justice for this poor lady. So again, as I say, it's our little tribute to the community itself for the way that they have got together and helped support this poor lady, James.
Absolutely. And a big part of, unfortunately, the victimization or the victims themselves, they feel powerless. They feel like this is one of the many things that's been stripped away from them. And for the community to come together and rally around her really shows her that she hasn't lost that power, that they are standing with her. They are not standing to prop her up. They are standing beside her to make sure that she leads the way and recaptures her sense of purpose and really realizes that she is a valuable member of that community. And I think that that really speaks volumes about how they are rallying around her. And even just as you can see the table full of gifts there, they may seem very, very minimal to us. But to her, that could be just a monumental step forward in just remembering that all of these people care, that they are with her through her struggle, and that she is not standing alone, Angus.
Yeah, indeed. And actually, I think that's a key point that's worth bringing out is on the face of it, well, they're just small little bits and pieces, but it's the symbolism of it. And don't forget, many of the families who do this in the community don't have a lot themselves, but ultimately they feel this sort of moral obligation to give, to share, to help. Doesn't matter how little that these people have, they will always have something to give. It's about the goodwill. So again, it's a huge tribute to the community, and thank you also to Deepa Singh at Sikh Youth UK for the video there and his support of the victim as well. So, right, James. Again, the clock marching on. We need to rush into our comment section. Always under time pressure. It's such a shame, isn't it? First,
I think it's your co-host's fault.
Well, it's both of us. We can't stop talking when we get going. So anyway, Rajveer Jagia. Apologies if I've made a mess of that name. British and India are not separate entities. They are one. British agencies share most of the information with India. Yeah, this is God. How often have I said this, James? Is that it's very clear there is some deep connection between India and Britain. Obviously, it's historic. It goes back to the days of empire. But clearly, they are still in cahoots, James. It always worries us, this.
Absolutely. And I mean, the idea and the context of it is good, that there's cooperation in terms of security. But at what point do you draw that line when there are laws that are supposed to protect that individual information from being shared with the foreign government? There is a limit, and that line seems to be really blurred, Angus.
Indeed. And there's a very relevant comment from Knockdown about what we've already been talking about, is that India is still using these draconian laws that it inherited from the British under the Empire. And actually, really, a point I didn't bring out earlier is that, yes, the whole legal system was inherited from the British. Now, on the whole, the British system was actually quite fair and just, as it had centuries to evolve itself into common law and equitable law, etc. Unfortunately, since the British left, India has rewritten a lot of those laws and actually made them even more draconian. So there is no excuse from the Indian state to excuse itself on this. India itself has made these laws absolutely draconian. It's not the British that made them draconian. Under British, they were actually relatively fair. But under India, they've crossed that line into draconian, James. That's the key difference here.
Absolutely, they were put in place, as I said earlier, to deal with the freedom fighters. And yet, when India took over and initiated those laws into their system, they were used to quell dissent instead.
Indeed,
and even just verbal.
Yeah, absolutely. And just to remind our Indian audience in particular, is that those laws that were in India essentially were the same laws that we had here in Great Britain at the time. So we were actually operating under the same laws, give or take a few local differences. But ultimately, the whole law system was the same in India as it was in Britain. So here in Great Britain, we were under the same laws. So again, that's why it was relatively fair. It was only when India took over, the Brahmins took over and weaponized that law, and increasingly so since 2014. So Sufton Muffin says the USA should investigate and kick out all of industrial elements in Silicon Valley. Yeah, in theory, great idea. In practice, how do you identify it? Yes, we absolutely, totally support this idea, and they are a problem for us, as we know, James. But how on earth do you actually prove it? How do you identify it, and how do you act upon it? It's not quite as easy as that, sadly.
Absolutely. And if you are too young to realize what's happened in the past, I mean, take a look at the way that the US hunted for people back in certain eras and how unfair it was. People were labeled Nazis or they were labeled Russian propagandists and all this, when it really wasn't true. They just labeled them that, or they went on these witch hunts that really destroyed people's lives when they really had no involvement in anything nefarious and were U.S. citizens that respected laws. So again, it's a tough one to do, Angus.
It is, sadly. S. Baines, oh yes, this is I had a fascinating discussion with Leila Gulen last week, at the end of last week, about India versus China. It was the geopolitics and how the two countries stack up against each other militarily, commercially, and their relationship and the potential going forward. And we did conclude, obviously, as we always tend to do, that Khalistan was really the only solution, that Khalistan would be the peacemaker, the regional peacemaker between those two potentially warring nations. And S. Baines says, look, the balkanization, the breakup of India is likely to happen regardless. As you say, it's only a matter of time when both the US and China realise that they have a shared interest to have a balkanized India. And that is an important point here, James, is that, the US and China, particularly China, will realise, and it's very clear to me, China would love the fact if India broke up, because it makes, at least as a superpower competitor to China, and therefore it's not unfeasible that China could start getting involved from a subterfuge level to try and encourage that balkanization, James.
Absolutely. And we've seen it where China is very involved in a lot of investments in infrastructure in other nations that's giving them a foothold in there. What they call their road, and I forget exactly what
Belt
the infrastructure program is.
Yeah,
that's right.
Belt and Road. Yeah.
And so we've seen it. So again, the Chinese could use that in the balkanization of India to get their foothold in even deeper there.
Indeed, we have to be very careful, because any gift from China always comes with a price. So always be very, very careful when dealing with China. TC, yes, absolutely, reaches the same conclusions. Tensions and ideology is so far apart that balkanization is inevitable. The antidote is, well, we all know what the antidote is. And the Punjab Times says, yes, because I referred to, because of course, to the key areas of conflict between China and India was, of course, up in the northwest and the far northeast. And up in the northwest, we have Ladakh. As you rightly remind us, Ladakh was Maharaja Ranjit Singh's empire. That formed part of the original empire. So ultimately, if that comes within Khalistan, it is justifiably part of Khalistan. And again, as I said in that podcast, it will help as a peacemaker. If Ladakh becomes part of Khalistan, then it no longer becomes a point of contention between India and China, James.
Absolutely, and that's a big point to be reminded of.
And K.S. Sandy, and thanks for the analysis. Well, thank you for your comment. As you rightly say, Western agencies are probably on it. I'm sure they're probably on it much even more so than we are. And you say China is going to tame India and will plan to take over adjacent territories soon. Or US and Pakistan might be interested to have a different, very reliable buffer called Khalistan. So again, you're reaching the same conclusion. Let's see how these power brokers turn this wheel. And ultimately, you've reached the same conclusion as so many of our commenters, as indeed I did in the podcast. We need Khalistan as this buffer zone, as this peacemaker, not just between India and China, but of course between India and Pakistan. We've got these three really fractious relationships between these three nations, and ultimately slap bang in the middle we will have Khalistan. So again, what better justification do you need, James, than between three nuclear armed powers than putting Khalistan in the middle, saying, as I said in the podcast, let's calm it down, any tensions, we're here now, let's just keep things calm.
Absolutely. And people talk about it, potentially being landlocked, but there's other nations that are landlocked that have had great influence in regional areas to calm the craziness, we say.
And AST comes to the same conclusion and reiterates what we've been saying, is that Khalistan has the potential to bring peace, stability, and most importantly of all, great prosperity to the entire region. The question is if India will be honest and brave enough to help the inevitable happen. Well, I think the key word there is it is inevitable. So India has basically got to either love it or lump it. It basically has no choice. It's coming. And Ind Portus takes us through into our final page as the clock counts down. God bless you both. Well, God bless all of our audience, James. As we keep saying, we couldn't do this without our wonderful audience.
Absolutely. The truth is there.
And Jimmy Gill says, great news channel. Well,
Sure.
as I
Don't
say,
have an answer for that.
oh, hello. That's Alexa. Somebody's Alexa speaking. Obviously, Alexa.
My Alexa kicked in. She didn't have an answer for that. So even she was speechless.
Exactly. So well done, Alexa. But we know the answer. Great news channel. Thank you, Jimmy Gill, for that kind comment. As indeed many people have said very similar comments. One of our regulars, Nirmal Singh, says the only solution. Khalistan, nothing less than Khalistan. Hindustan terrorist government should be destroyed once and for all. Well, as we keep saying, it is inevitable, James. This word keeps coming up. It is inevitable.
It is. And hey, maybe it's because India is listening to us right now through my Alexa. Who knows?
Exactly. As I'm sure it
Maybe
probably
they'll listen
is.
to us and say, hey, they're right.
Absolutely. And Rinko Singh signs us off with Khalistan Zindabad. But one of my favourite comments comes from Punjabi Jat, who thanks us for the lovely programme. Much appreciated. Thank you for your comment. But love from Khalistan. So you see, Khalistan isn't just a geographical location. It is a peace of mind. It is a place in already. It exists already. It is a state of mind. Khalistan. It will be a country, but currently for now, it is a state of mind. Love from Khalistan, James.
Absolutely. And I think in that video, I saw somebody with a vest on that the back said citizen of Khalistan, I think it said. But
Excellent. We're going to have to get some of those and have team citizens of Khalistan t-shirts and shirts printed because as we say, the word is, it is inevitable. Let's get there. Let's accelerate the program and say we are already citizens of that great nation, that great Sikh sovereign nation of Khalistan. We look forward to that date. But unfortunately, as we run out of time, as always, we're going to have to rush through the end now. We'll bring things to a close for another day. Thanks so much for all your comments. Do keep them coming. Don't forget you can message us directly at message@satlugetv.com if there's any you'd like to bring to our attention directly. But that's it for another day. Thanks so much for all your loyalty. Thanks for watching. Thanks for all your comments. Do keep them coming. It's a goodbye from me. It's a goodbye from James.
stay safe, everyone.
You have, of course, been watching Perspectives. We will see you next time.